Dr. Rutherford, certified functional medicine practitioner.
Dr. Randall Gates, board certified chiropractic neurologist. We're both chiropractors, and you know us because you're watching this video. And we're here today talking about non-celiac gluten sensitivity.
And we're talking about this because this was Dr. Gates's genesis. Again, actually, we're always trying to figure out ways to help patients to stay better once they're out of here. And this is one of the most common reasons that people do bad things or stop doing what we tell them to do once they have left. So non-celiac gluten sensitivity is
this entity where you eat gluten and you feel worse. And the reason why we're doing this, just to backtrack, the first week we're doing these videos because we hear of patients who do really well in our program, and then they finish the program. We don't see them in maintenance, which is fine. But then they start eating foods they shouldn't be eating, and then they start feeling worse, and the results are basically taken back to a large degree, and that's not fine. And so that's why we're doing these weekly broadcasts. And then also last week we talked about diet saboteurs, how your interaction with loved ones and friends, where people will say things to you and there's a huge element of peer pressure there that you should have grandma's cheesecake or you should have Jones rolls, and you go ahead and you eat those foods, and really what that's doing to your overall success and where you want to get to in terms of your health. So we've tried to lay that out, and now we're going to talk about non-celiac gluten sensitivity, largely because it's another area of great confusion for patients and for maintenance patients, because there's a great amount of confusion disseminated through the media that your neighbor or your loved one is going to tell you, as being the absolute truth, and it really is not. So non-celiac gluten sensitivity talks about, or really defines, this group of people who eat gluten and generally feel worse, but they don't have celiac disease, which is an autoimmune reaction where the immune system kills the intestines when gluten is consumed, and they don't have specifically a wheat allergy, like a peanut allergy. So you eat wheat and you start to have an anaphylactic reaction in your intestines, or that type of an allergic reaction.
You might not even have bad intestinal symptoms, or you might not even have any intestinal symptoms.
And really this came from alternative medicine practitioners about 10 years ago, telling patients to go off of gluten because of the emerging research at that time relative to gluten in the thyroid and gluten in other autoimmune diseases. At that time, there were really no gluten-free products readily available at Costco or many other mainstream supermarkets. So in essence, when an individual was gluten-free back then, they were grain-free. And so they were basically eating meats, vegetables, and fruits to a large degree. And people started telling their doctors, man, I just feel so good, I'm going gluten-free. And their doctors would test them for celiac disease, and they didn't have celiac. And the doctor is scratching his head saying, I don't know why you feel better, but this seems to be happening. There was such a movement that happened that the gastroenterology community had to acknowledge this group of individuals who ate gluten and felt worse, went on a gluten-free diet, felt better, and then if they ate gluten again, they felt worse. Now, because gluten is something we eat, it's commonly associated with IBS, which is irritable bowel syndrome. Now, the literature on IBS, we just did a whole broadcast on it. It's complicated. You can watch our hangout from this week. The literature tying gluten to IBS has come into question in the last year or 2 years. And that's what you're seeing out there in the media. The gentleman who did this research, his name is Peter Gibson, and he took, in essence, a group of IBS patients, and he put them on a low FODMAP diet, which, watch our broadcast from today, but basically that includes several types of fruit, several types of vegetables. It also includes dairy and wheat. And then he took 3 groups. He had one group introduce gluten, one group introduce gluten and dairy, and one group introduce only dairy. And he saw that the group eating gluten and dairy felt significantly worse in terms of their IBS symptoms. The gluten group felt a little worse, but not worse enough for it to be significant enough for him to say that gluten is the cause of IBS. So from that, they concluded that gluten is not a problem and non-celiac gluten sensitivity is not an issue. However, they followed up this study and they looked at not IBS, but depression. And this came out in a journal in 2014. We can give it to any of you who want to see it. And he found a huge statistical difference in those who ate gluten, who had non-celiac gluten sensitivity, felt depressed. They just didn't feel well. And so he came out and said, well, non-celiac gluten sensitivity does exist on this basis. But this never hit the mainstream media. I have not seen one mainstream media outlet report this data yet. So, but there's a lot of research out there, or not research, a lot of information out there saying that based on this first study that gluten is just a fad and that you should ignore it, and it's just one of those trendy diets.
So to summarize that, just in case that was a lot of data, basically you eat gluten in the non-celiac gluten sensitivity person, it's going to affect your nervous system more than it's going to affect your gut. So you might get brain fog, you might get short-term memory loss, you might get other neurological issues, maybe you lose your balance if you have a bad cerebellum or something like that. And so that's something that I find that a lot of people are like, well, my stomach's okay, you know.
Absolutely.
And what that study says is, yeah, your stomach may be okay, but your brain isn't, and your nervous system isn't, and maybe even the nerve endings in your feet, and those of you who have peripheral neuropathy can be affected by it.
And as we discussed in our first broadcast a few weeks ago, you may not have stomach symptoms, but they've also shown that gluten creates leaky gut syndrome, even in normal control subjects. So if you've been through this broadcast and you're watching, or if you've been through our program, you're watching this broadcast, you know how much emphasis we have on the gut. You know how much emphasis we have on the bacteria in the gut. You know how much emphasis we have on repairing leaky gut syndrome. Gluten is a pivotal component of leaky gut syndrome, and taking gluten out of the diet is a pivotal component in helping leaky gut syndrome. But as Dr. Rutherford said, eating gluten for those who have non-celiac gluten sensitivity, which frankly is most of our patients, will cause a neurological consequence, cause you to feel worse. Things like fibromyalgia symptoms can come back, neuropathy symptoms, balance-related symptoms, which is about 80% of our practice right there.
Yeah, to bring it back down to like practicality, had a patient come in a couple of weeks ago, was actually here with someone else that he was bringing in, and I looked at him and he looked really not very good. Turned out he started eating gluten again. He said, well, you know, my stomach felt okay, and I didn't have a lot of choice. We were moving, and neurologically, you could just see him sitting there. He didn't feel good. I kind of laid into him, and it was kind of funny because he came back a couple of days later with this other patient that was about to start or was going to get evaluated, and he said 48 hours I stopped doing the gluten, I feel better. The whole point is we have a lot of people come back and they say things are coming back. The first thing we do is we'll review what we asked you to do, and man, if we told you to be off of gluten, you just have to stay off of gluten. And don't even, and we should do a whole separate 5 minutes or 7 minutes on gluten-free products.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Because I thought what you were going to say is also that they were eating meats and fruits and veggies, and everybody felt good, and they started eating gluten-free products. That's another presentation that we need to do. Okay, so you need to be careful about gluten-free products. But if you have been told to be off of gluten at the end of your program here, you need to stay off of it forever. Sorry, it's hard. It's not easy. Trust me, I grew up in an Italian family, pizza, bread, the whole thing. But you have to stay off of it if you want to maintain the long-term results. And that's our goal. Our goal is not to have you coming back here forever. Our goal is for you to have the tools to be able to take care of this yourself. Okay?
Exactly. So thanks for watching.
Right.
If you have any other topics you want us to do, let us know. We're listening all week long, and we hope you're all doing well and doing well with your diet.
Yep.